His hand closed around her throat before she could react. Chief Petty Officer Brock Lundgren slammed her against the barracks wall with enough force to crack the drywall behind her skull. His face twisted into something beyond rage as he hissed that women like her did not belong here and never would. The weight of his body pinned her in place while his fingers dug into her windpipe. What Lundgren did not see in that moment of fury, what no one watching from the darkened windows could have known, were the four figures who had just stepped out of the shadows near Building 618 across the courtyard. For colonels, for witnesses, and Petty Officer Second Class Kira Oduya, despite the hand crushing her windpipe, smiled. Before we dive into this story, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Have you ever seen someone underestimated because of how they looked? 36 hours earlier, Kira had stepped off the transport at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado with nothing but her sea bag and orders that made no sense. The California sun beat down on the infamous grinder as she crossed toward the processing station. All around her, candidates for the Inter-Service Assessment Program gathered in nervous clusters. Most were men. Most were large. Most looked at her with confusion or dismissal or both. She was 5'4", 128 pounds. Her uniform fit regulation perfect, but did nothing to hide the fact that she looked more like a college athlete than a special operations candidate. That was fine. She had stopped caring what people assumed years ago. The assessment program was officially described as a joint evaluation for personnel from multiple branches. Unofficially, nobody seemed to know exactly what it was for. Kira had received her orders directly from someone whose name she did not recognize, routed through channels that left even her commanding officer puzzled. She was told to report. She was told to perform. She was told nothing else. A young sailor nearly collided with her as he rushed toward formation. Seaman Apprentice Jerome Talley, according to his nameplate. He stammered an apology while struggling to balance 3 equipment bags that clearly were not all his. Kira stopped him with a hand on his shoulder. She told him to breathe. Then she showed him a trick her father had taught her decades ago, a way to redistribute weight across the shoulders that turned an impossible load into merely difficult. Jerome stared at her like she had performed magic. She told him to find her if he needed help again. He nodded with something like hope in his eyes and hurried toward the formation area. The instructors gathered them on the grinder by 0600. 8 men in immaculate uniforms with the bearing of combat veterans and the expressions of people who enjoyed watching others suffer. One stood apart from the rest, taller, broader. His eyes swept the candidates like a predator surveying prey. Chief Petty Officer Brock Lundgren. Even before he opened his mouth, Kira recognized the type. Every woman in the military knew men like him. The ones who believed they were guardians of sacred ground. The ones who saw female candidates not as peers to be evaluated, but as invaders to be repelled. Lundgren began his welcome speech with statistics about failure rates. 80% would not complete the program. 90% of those who failed would do so in the first week. He let those numbers hang in the morning air before his gaze settled directly on Kira. He asked if anyone felt they were in the wrong place, if anyone wanted to save themselves the embarrassment. Kira met his stare without blinking. She had faced worse than hard looks. She had faced enemy fire in places that did not exist on any official map. She had held a dying teammate in her arms and kept fighting because stopping meant more death. This man with his pressed uniform and his intimidation tactics was not the worst thing she had ever seen. He was not even close. Lundgren moved on, but she felt his attention like crosshairs on her back for the rest of the morning. The first evolution was a timed obstacle course. Standard assessment material designed to establish baseline fitness. Kira completed it in the top 5 of all candidates, ahead of men who outweighed her by 80 pounds. She was not even breathing hard when she crossed the finish line. That was her first mistake. She saw it in Lundgren's face. The flicker of something beyond disappointment. Surprise. And beneath the surprise, fear. After the evolution, he pulled her aside near the equipment shed. His voice dropped to something only she could hear. He told her that he knew her type. The overachievers. The ones who thought they could prove something. He told her she would receive special attention during this assessment. Personal oversight. He wanted to make sure she was evaluated with appropriate rigor. Kira said nothing. She had learned long ago that silence often revealed more than words. Lundgren seemed to expect defiance. Her calm unsettled him. He dismissed her with a wave, but she caught the tension in his shoulders as she walked away. That night, alone in her assigned quarters, she noticed something strange. 4 high-ranking officers had been observing from the tower throughout the day. She had seen them during the obstacle course, during the formation, during Lundgren's speech. They wore no unit insignia she recognized. Their uniforms bore ranks she could identify, but names she could not read at that distance. Who sent 06 officers to watch a candidate assessment? Her phone buzzed. A text from a number not in her contacts. The message contained 4 words. "We are watching. Perform." Kira deleted it. But sleep came slowly that night. Somewhere in the darkness, decisions were being made about her future. People she had never met were evaluating her for purposes she did not understand. And Chief Petty Officer Lundgren was already planning how to destroy her. Day 2 began in the water. The pool competency test was designed to simulate the panic of drowning while demanding technical precision. Candidates treaded water in full gear while instructors circled like sharks waiting for weakness. Kira had done this before. 3 deployments had taken her through exercises far worse than anything a training pool could offer. She focused on her breathing, on the rhythm of her kicks, on the weight of the equipment pulling at her shoulders. Around her, candidates struggled and gasped and fought the primal terror that water always brought. Lundgren entered the pool during the mask recovery drill. Each candidate had to remove their mask underwater, clear it, and replace it without surfacing. Standard procedure. Kira had performed this evolution dozens of times. She dove beneath the surface and pulled her mask free. The chlorine stung her eyes, but she kept them open, orienting herself in the blue haze. Her fingers found the mask strap. She began the clearing procedure. A boot connected with her hand. The mask spun away into the depths. She looked up and saw Lundgren's legs churning above her. His foot swung again, this time catching her shoulder and driving her deeper. Accident. That was what he would call it. The chaos of training. Bodies in motion. Her lungs began to burn. The mask was 10 feet away now, sinking toward the bottom. She had perhaps 40 seconds of air remaining. Less if she panicked. Kira did not panic. She had learned that skill in a burning building in a country she could never name, holding pressure on a wound while bullets cracked overhead. Panic was a luxury she had abandoned years ago. She kicked toward the mask with powerful strokes. Her fingers closed around it just as the edges of her vision began to darken. She cleared it in one smooth motion, pressed it to her face, and surfaced with 3 seconds to spare. Lundgren stood at the pool edge. His expression betrayed nothing, but she saw the flicker of frustration in his jaw. He had expected her to fail. He had tried to make her fail, and she had refused. The other instructors marked her as passing. One of them, a senior chief with silver at her temples, watched the exchange with knowing eyes. After the pool evolution, that same senior chief found Kira near the equipment lockers. Her nameplate read Cortez. Her voice was low when she spoke, meant only for the 2 of them. She told Kira to be careful with Lundgren. 3 female candidates had washed out under his supervision in the past 2 years. All of them had been performing well before sudden failures appeared in their records. All of them had filed complaints that went nowhere. Cortez had tried to push the issue up the chain. The complaints had disappeared into administrative limbo. Kira asked why Cortez was telling her this. Because someone needs to survive long enough to matter, Cortez replied. Because the ones who came before deserved better than silence. The land navigation exercise began at 1400. Candidates received coordinates, compasses, and maps. They had 4 hours to reach 6 checkpoints across the base terrain. Kira noticed immediately that her compass was off by several degrees. Sabotage was not subtle when you knew to look for it. She adjusted her calculations mentally and set off into the hills. The sun beat down without mercy. Other candidates passed her going the wrong direction, trusting equipment that had not been tampered with. She stayed her course. For checkpoints, 5, 6, she finished first among all candidates with 20 minutes to spare. The evaluators recorded her time with expressions that ranged from impressed to suspicious. Lundgren was not among them. He had disappeared somewhere during the exercise, likely expecting her to wander lost until time expired. That night, Kira sat alone in her quarters. The small space felt like a cell despite its adequate size. She reached into her sea bag and retrieved the only personal item she had brought. A photograph, worn at the edges from years of handling. Petty Officer First Class Diego Reyes smiled up at her from the image. Her teammate, her friend, dead now for 18 months because she had hesitated when hesitation meant death. The mission played behind her eyes like it always did. The building, the fire, the enemy combatant with his weapon raised. A child in the corner, frozen with terror, positioned directly behind the target. Kira had the shot. She could have taken it, but her finger would not move because missing meant hitting that child. Reyes saw her hesitation. Reyes moved to cover her position. Reyes took the bullet that came while she was still frozen. His last words before the light left his eyes were simple. Next time, do not think. Just act. She had not hesitated since, but she had not forgiven herself either. Morning formation came too early. Kira took her position among the candidates and waited for the day's instructions. Instead, Lundgren approached her directly. His face wore the satisfaction of a man holding winning cards. He informed her that a report had been filed regarding safety violations during the pool evolution, failure to maintain proper equipment protocols, reckless endangerment of fellow candidates. The details were lies wrapped in official language, but the meaning was clear. She was being summoned to a disciplinary hearing. One more violation would result in removal from the program. Lundgren told her to report to Building 618 at 0900. His voice carried false sympathy when he added that some people simply were not meant for this level of training. No shame in knowing one's limits. Kira said nothing. She would not give him the reaction he wanted. As Lundgren walked away, she caught movement in her peripheral vision. The observation tower. 4 figures stood watching. One of them, a woman with short gray hair and command presence even at this distance, lowered a pair of binoculars and turned to speak to the others. Kira could not hear the words, but she saw the woman gesture toward Lundgren's retreating form. She saw another officer, a man with the bearing of a Marine commander, nod slowly. Something was happening beyond this assessment. Something involving those 4 observers and Lundgren and her. The pieces were moving on a board she could not yet see. She had 23 hours until the hearing that might end everything she had worked for. 23 hours to understand why powerful people were watching her struggle. 23 hours before Lundgren tried to finish what he had started. The only question was whether anyone would believe her when the time came to speak. The disciplinary hearing convened in a windowless room on the 2nd floor of Building 618. Lieutenant Commander Adrian Chase presided from behind a metal desk cluttered with forms and regulations. His face held the practiced neutrality of a man who had already made his decision. Lundgren sat to the right, his posture relaxed, his expression carrying the confidence of someone who knew the outcome. He presented his evidence with military precision. Timestamps. Witness statements from instructors Kira had never spoken to. Technical violations she had never committed. Kira stood at attention and listened to lies dressed in official language. When Chase asked for her response, she provided it calmly. She explained the mask incident. She described the faulty compass. She offered to submit to any technical evaluation that would prove her competence. Chase nodded along without really hearing. His eyes kept drifting to Lundgren as if seeking approval. The connection between them was invisible but unmistakable. Whatever relationship existed there, it predated this hearing by years. The verdict came in under 10 minutes. Probationary status. One more documented violation and Petty Officer Second Class Kira Odia would be removed from the assessment program with a notation in her permanent record. Chase delivered the sentence like a man reading a grocery list. Lundgren escorted her out. His hand did not touch her, but his presence pressed against her back like a threat. In the hallway, away from witnesses, he leaned close. He told her this was just the beginning. He told her that women had tried before and women had failed before, and she would be no different. He told her to enjoy her last few days playing soldier. Kira kept walking. She did not give him the satisfaction of a response. The other candidates had heard about the hearing by lunch. Word traveled fast in enclosed training environments. The ones who had spoken to her before now avoided eye contact. They clustered in groups that did not include her, their conversations dropping to whispers when she passed. She understood. Association with a marked candidate was career poison. These men and women had sacrificed too much to reach this point. They could not afford to be pulled down by her gravity. Only Jerome Talley broke the pattern. He sat across from her in the mess hall without hesitation, his tray clattering against the table like a declaration. She told him he did not have to do this. His position was precarious enough without adding her problems to his weight. Jerome shook his head. He told her she had helped him when no one else would. He told her that loyalty was not something you calculated based on convenience. Either you had it or you did not. Kira felt something loosen in her chest. A small thing, but real. The afternoon brought combatives training. Hand-to-hand assessment in a sand pit surrounded by evaluators with clipboards. Candidates were paired randomly for grappling matches designed to test technique under pressure. Kira drew the largest man in the program. Petty Officer 3rd Class Dominic Webb. 6'3", 240 pounds. Arms like bridge cables and a reach that exceeded hers by nearly a foot. Webb approached the match professionally. No trash talk, no posturing. He was here to be evaluated, not to prove anything about gender. Kira respected that even as she settled into her fighting stance. The whistle blew. Webb advanced with a clinch attempt, tried to use his weight advantage to control the engagement. Kira slipped left, redirected his momentum, and swept his lead leg. He hit the sand hard, but recovered quickly. Skill, not just size. They exchanged positions for 2 minutes. Webb landed a takedown. Kira reversed into a submission attempt. He powered out. She transitioned to a choke that he barely escaped. The evaluators watched with increasing interest as the smaller candidate consistently neutralized the larger one through superior technique. The opening came at the 3-minute mark. Webb overcommit to a throw. Kira saw the arm bar present itself like a gift. She could hyperextend his elbow in half a second. In the match, prove her dominance beyond question. Her hands moved into position, and then stopped. The injury would sideline Webb for weeks, possibly end his candidacy entirely. He had done nothing to deserve that. He was just another person trying to prove themselves. She released the position and reset to neutral. Webb looked at her with confusion that slowly became understanding. She had him. They both knew it, and she had chosen not to destroy him for the sake of victory. The whistle ended the match. The evaluators marked their clipboards. Lundgren, watching from the edge of the pit, wrote something with aggressive strokes. Hesitation. That was what he would call it. Another failure to document. Across the base, in quarters reserved for senior personnel, Brock Lundgren sat alone with his thoughts. The Oduya woman was better than he had expected. Faster, more skilled, more resilient. Every obstacle he placed in her path, she found a way around. His father's voice echoed in his memory. The old man had been a SEAL in the years when that word meant something pure. He had spoken often about the corruption that would come when standards were lowered to accommodate those who did not belong. Women, the soft, the weak. They would dilute the brotherhood until nothing sacred remained. Lundgren had inherited that conviction like a family heirloom. He had built his career on maintaining the walls his father described. 3 candidates before Oduya had tested those walls. 3 candidates had broken against them. But this one was different. This one might actually be good enough. That possibility terrified him more than any enemy he had ever faced. Evening fell over Coronado. Kira was returning equipment to the storage shed when she heard footsteps behind her. Lundgren materialized from the shadows between buildings. No witnesses. No cameras. Just the two of them in the darkness. He stepped close enough that she could smell coffee on his breath. His voice was barely above a whisper when he told her that he knew what she was doing. Surviving. Waiting. Hoping someone would notice and intervene. He told her that no one was coming. He told her that he had broken candidates far stronger than her. He told her that by the time this assessment ended, she would be a cautionary tale other women whispered about. Kira held his gaze without flinching. When she spoke, her voice carried no anger, no fear, only absolute certainty. You should stop now. Lundgren laughed. The sound echoed off the buildings like a bark. He asked if that was supposed to be a threat. He asked what exactly she thought she could do to him. Kira said nothing more. She simply held his eyes until his laughter died and something uncomfortable flickered across his face. Then she walked past him into the night. For words. They hung in the air long after she disappeared. Lundgren stood in the darkness and told himself that she was nothing. A temporary problem. An obstacle to be removed. But somewhere beneath this certainty, doubt had begun to grow. The stress inoculation chamber was a concrete box designed to simulate the worst moments a captured operator might face. Darkness, noise, disorientation, physical discomfort calibrated to push candidates to their psychological limits without crossing into actual torture. Kira had trained for this. Every special operations candidate did. But training and experience were different animals, and the men running this evolution knew exactly how to blur that line. They pulled her from formation at 0400. A hood over her head, hands bound behind her back, rough voices barking contradictory commands. She was shoved into a vehicle, driven in circles to destroy her sense of direction, then dragged into the chamber and forced to her knees. The hood came off. Blinding light replaced total darkness. Lundgren stood before her in the role of interrogator. The questions began immediately. Name, rank, service number. She provided the authorized responses. Lundgren demanded more. She repeated only what the code allowed. He screamed that she was lying. She maintained her bearing. Water came next. Not waterboarding, which would have violated every regulation in existence, but close enough. A hose aimed at her face while she knelt with hands bound. The pressure was just below the threshold of actual drowning, but the panic it induced was real. Kira étreitsit inov. She had learned this technique from her father during long summers in their backyard, when he transformed family time into preparation for a world he knew she would someday enter. Master Chief Samuel Oduya had served 30 years in the Navy. He had seen men break under pressure that would have crushed lesser souls. He taught his daughter that the body could endure far more than the mind believed possible. Pain was temporary. Failure was permanent. The only defeat that mattered was the one you accepted. She heard his voice now, steady and warm beneath the chaos of the interrogation. Breathe. Focus. Outlast. They cannot take what you refuse to give. Lundgren increased the pressure. The questions became personal. He referenced her service record, her deployments, names she recognized. He was trying to prove he had access to information that should have been classified, trying to make her feel exposed and vulnerable. She gave him nothing. An hour passed. Then two. The other candidates had rotated through their sessions in 20-minute blocks. Lundgren showed no sign of stopping. Behind the observation glass, Captain Raymond Sue watched with growing unease. The Navy SEAL commander had overseen countless training evolutions. He understood the value of stress inoculation. He also understood the difference between training and abuse. What he was witnessing had crossed that line 15 minutes ago. He turned to Colonel Vance and asked how much longer this would continue. Vance consulted his watch, but said nothing. His expression suggested he was cataloging everything for a purpose Sue did not yet understand. Colonel Blackwood made a note in her file. Colonel Volkov stood with arms crossed, his jaw tight with barely contained anger. They were all watching. They were all documenting. But none of them intervened. Kira did not know about the observers. She knew only the water and the noise and Lundgren's voice hammering at her defenses. 3 hours in, her body was shaking. For hours in, she could no longer feel her hands. But she did not break. She did not beg. She did not give him a single word beyond what regulations required. When Lundgren finally ended the session, his face showed something she had never seen there before. Not satisfaction, not triumph, something closer to respect, quickly smothered beneath familiar contempt. He told her she had passed. The words sounded like it cost him something to say. Jerome found her behind the medical building an hour later. She was sitting against the wall, still trembling, trying to force water down a throat that had forgotten how to swallow. He sat beside her without asking permission and offered his canteen. She took it. The water was warm, but it tasted like survival. Jerome told her that he had watched part of her session through the window before they pulled him away. He told her he had never seen anyone endure what she endured. He told her that he had almost quit this morning, that the pressure had become too much and he had written a resignation letter in his head during the pre-dawn darkness. Then he watched her refuse to break, and he tore that letter up. Kira looked at him, this young sailor who had attached himself to her orbit despite every reason to keep his distance. She told him that strength was not about being unbreakable. It was about breaking and choosing to continue anyway. Jerome nodded slowly. Something in his eyes suggested he would remember those words for the rest of his life. That evening, Cortez appeared at Kira's quarters with a folder tucked under her arm. She checked the hallway before entering, then spread the contents across Kira's bunk. Complaints, incident reports, medical documentation. 6 women over 8 years, all of them assigned to programs where Lundgren held influence. All of them experienced similar patterns of targeting, false reports, and manufactured failures. All of them were silenced through transfers or separations or quiet settlements that included non-disclosure agreements. Cortez told her that these files were supposed to have been destroyed. A friend in personnel had saved copies before the purge. She told Kira that Lundgren was protected by people who believed in what he was doing. People who saw him as a guardian rather than a predator. Kira asked what Cortez expected her to do with this information. Survive, Cortez replied. Survive long enough for it to matter. Then make sure the next woman does not face this alone. She gathered the files and left as quietly as she had come. Midnight found Kira on the beach, running through sand that sucked at her boots with every stride. She could not sleep. The stress inoculation had left her wired, her nervous system unable to distinguish between safety and threat. Movement helped. Exhaustion was the only sedative that worked. She did not notice Lundgren until she had already passed the last security light. He emerged from the dunes like something born of darkness. His uniform was gone, replaced by civilian clothes. His posture held none of the rigid formality she associated with his instructor role. His eyes were different. She saw that immediately. Whatever mask he wore during daylight hours had slipped away. What remained was something raw and dangerous. He told her that this was not training. He told her that he was done playing by rules that protected people like her. Kira stopped running. Her heart pounded not from exertion, but from recognition. She had seen eyes like his before. In the moments before violence became inevitable, the beach stretched empty in both directions. No witnesses, no cameras, no one who would hear her if she screamed. Lundgren stepped closer, and the 4 colonels were nowhere in sight. Lundgren closed the distance between them with deliberate steps. His voice carried across the empty beach like a blade drawn slowly from its sheath. He told her that he had tried to handle this professionally. He told her that she had forced his hand by refusing to accept her place. He told her that women like her were a disease infecting institutions built by better men. Kira held her ground. Her body shifted into a fighting stance without conscious thought, weight balanced, hands ready. She calculated angles and options with the cold precision of someone who had survived actual combat. Lundgren was larger, but she was faster. He had training, but she had experience. If he touched her, she would end him. He must have seen something in her eyes because his advance slowed. The predator reassessing its prey, recognizing that this particular target had teeth. A flashlight beam swept across the dunes 50 yards away. Another instructor on patrol, oblivious to the confrontation hidden in darkness. The light passed over their position without stopping, but the interruption shattered whatever momentum Lundgren had built. He stepped back. The mask began reassembling itself over his features. When he spoke again, his voice had returned to something resembling professional detachment. Tomorrow, he said, the final assessment. She would be assigned to his squad exclusively. 48 hours with no other instructors to interfere. No observers to document. Just him and her in the wilderness where accidents happened to people who did not belong. He walked away without waiting for a response. Kira watched him disappear into the darkness and did not move until her heartbeat finally slowed. Sleep came in fragments that night. Every sound became Lundgren's footsteps. Every shadow became his silhouette. She lay in her bunk and stared at the ceiling and tried to remember why she had wanted this. Her service record played through her mind like a highlight reel she had not asked to watch. 3 deployments. 14 confirmed enemy neutralizations. Commendations that other operators would have killed for. She had earned her place in special operations through blood and sacrifice and choices that still haunted her dreams. And none of it mattered to men like Lundgren. None of it would ever matter. The memory came unbidden, as it always did when her defenses were low. The building had been burning when they entered. Intelligence suggested 3 high-value targets on the second floor. Kira's team moved through smoke and flames with practiced efficiency, clearing rooms, eliminating threats, pushing toward the objective. She found the final target in a bedroom at the end of the hall. A man with a weapon raised, finger on the trigger, already pivoting toward the door. Behind him, pressed against the wall, a child no older than 7. A boy with enormous eyes frozen in terror, positioned directly in Kira's line of fire. The shot was there. Set her mass. Clean kill. All she had to do was pull the trigger. Her finger would not move. The geometry was wrong. The child was too close. If her aim was off by even a fraction, if the round passed through the target, if the man fell in the wrong direction. A dozen scenarios played through her mind in the space between heartbeats. Reyes saw her hesitation. Reyes moved to cover the angle she had abandoned. Reyes stepped into the line of fire just as the target squeezed his trigger. The bullet took him in the throat. Kira killed the target a half-second later. The child survived. The mission succeeded. None of that mattered when she held Reyes in her arms and watched the light fade from his eyes. His last words came out as a gurgle through the blood filling his mouth. Next time, do not think. Just act. She carried those words like a scar that would never heal. Morning formation assembled under skies the color of old bruises. The candidates who remained looked hollow, their enthusiasm ground away by days of relentless pressure. Kira took her position and waited for the announcement she already knew was coming. Lundgren read the squad assignments with theatrical satisfaction. 8 candidates split between 3 instructors. Kira's name appeared last, alone, assigned exclusively to Chief Petty Officer Lundgren's personal oversight for the duration of the final assessment. The other candidates avoided her eyes. They understood what the assignment meant, even if they would never acknowledge it. Before the briefing continued, Kira found a moment to step away. Her phone felt heavy in her hand as she dialed the number she had memorized before she could read. Her father answered on the second ring. Master Chief Samuel Odia, retired, his voice still carrying the authority of 3 decades in uniform. She did not explain the situation in detail. She did not need to. She simply asked how he had survived 30 years in a Navy that did not want him. How he had endured when superior officers tried to break him and peers tried to exclude him, and the institution itself seemed designed to reject everything he represented. Her father was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his words carried the weight of wisdom earned through suffering. I became undeniable, he said. I performed so well that ignoring me became impossible. Excellence is a weapon they cannot take from you. Be so good that refusing to see you becomes their failure, not yours. Kira closed her eyes. She told him she loved him. He told her he had never doubted her for a single moment of her life. Then the line went dead, and she was alone with her father's words echoing in her chest. The final assessment staging area buzzed with controlled chaos. Candidates checked gear and studied maps and tried to hide their fear behind professional masks. Lundgren gathered his squad of one at the edge of the formation. He announced modifications to the standard assessment route, additional miles through terrain known for injuries, extended timeline without resupply, conditions that would push candidates beyond normal limits into the territory where people broke or quit or simply could not continue. Kira listened without reaction. She had expected this. Lundgren would use every tool available to destroy her, and the wilderness offered tools that left no evidence. What she had not expected was the convoy of vehicles that arrived as Lundgren finished his briefing. Four figures emerged in operational gear, their ranks visible even at distance. Colonel Vance, Colonel Blackwood, Captain Sue, Colonel Volkov. They approached the staging area with the casual authority of people who belonged wherever they chose to stand. Colonel Vance addressed the assembled candidates and instructors. He announced that the final assessment would include embedded observers from Joint Command. Standard oversight protocol. His eyes found Kira for just a moment. Something passed between them that felt like acknowledgement. Lundgren's face showed nothing, but Kira saw his jaw tighten. His private hunting ground had just become crowded. Whatever he planned for the next 48 hours would now have witnesses. The four colonels were coming along, and somewhere behind their presence, a purpose Kira still did not understand was finally beginning to reveal itself. The modified route cut through terrain that seemed designed by malice. Steep grades that turned leg muscles into burning cables. Loose shale that shifted beneath every step. Sun that beat down without mercy or pause. Lundgren set a pace that bordered on punitive. He stayed at the front of the formation, driving the candidates forward with the relentless energy of a man with something to prove. The four colonels spread throughout the column, observing without interfering, their presence a constant reminder that this assessment had become something more than routine. By mid-morning, the first candidate broke. A petty officer from Naval Intelligence who had performed well in every previous evolution simply stopped walking. He sat down on a boulder and announced that he was done. No amount of encouragement could move him. The medics evacuated him within the hour. The second casualty came before noon. Heat exhaustion compounded by dehydration and the accumulated weight of days without adequate rest. Another capable operator reduced to a shaking figure being carried to a waiting vehicle. Kira pushed through the pain. Her body screamed for rest, but her father's words played on repeat in her mind. Excellence is a weapon. Be undeniable. The candidate ahead of her began to falter around 1400. Petty Officer Second Class Declan Marsh, a former Marine who had transitioned to Navy Special Programs. He was built like a tank, but even tanks had limits. His knee had been bothering him since the second checkpoint. Now it was failing entirely. Declan stumbled and nearly fell. Kira caught him before he hit the ground. She could see the resignation forming in his eyes, the same look the other two had worn before they quit. She told him to give her his pack. He protested weakly, but she was already pulling it from his shoulders, adding its weight to her own. 60 extra pounds that turned difficult into brutal. They continued together. Kira matched her pace to his limping stride. She talked him through the pain with the same techniques her father had used on her years ago. Focus on the next step, then the next. Nothing exists beyond the immediate moment. Lundgren noticed within minutes. He doubled back to their position with fury barely contained behind professional language. He announced that unauthorized assistance violated assessment protocols. He declared that Petty Officer Odia would be disqualified for compromising the individual evaluation standard. Colonel Blackwood appeared at his shoulder before he could continue. Her voice carried the calm authority of someone who had commanded men in situations Lundgren could only imagine. She asked him to cite the specific regulation prohibiting teamwork during field assessments. She waited while he searched for words he could not find. Then she noted that cooperation under adverse conditions was precisely the quality special operations valued most highly. Lundgren had no response. He turned and resumed his position at the front of the column. but Kira saw his hands trembling with suppressed rage as he walked away. The rest break came at 1600. Candidates collapsed in whatever shade they could find, too exhausted to speak. Kira helped Declan to a medic who began treating his knee with the efficiency of long practice. Colonel Vance approached her while she refilled her canteen. He suggested they walk together, just briefly, away from the others. They stopped beneath a twisted Joshua tree that provided minimal shelter from the sun. Vance studied her for a long moment before speaking. He told her that she had been lied to. Not maliciously, but necessarily. The orders that brought her to Coronado contained deliberate omissions designed to ensure an authentic evaluation. Kira asked what he meant. Vance explained that she was not being assessed to join a program. She was being assessed to lead one. The four colonels represented a joint special operations initiative spanning every branch of service. They were searching for exceptional operators who could command mixed teams in environments where traditional leadership models failed. He told her that he had found her file after a third deployment. He had read about the mission where Reyes died. He had seen beyond the official report to the woman who had faced an impossible choice and emerged not broken, but forged. This assessment was never about proving she belonged. It was about proving she could handle the impossible. Kira absorbed his words in silence. Everything she thought she understood about the past week rearranged itself into a new pattern. The mysterious text message, the constant observation, the colonels embedded in an assessment that should have been routine. She asked why they had allowed Lundgren to torment her if they were evaluating her for command. Vance's expression hardened. He told her that leaders faced opposition from within as often as from without. Her ability to maintain her integrity while being systematically targeted was precisely what they needed to see. He also told her that Lundgren's behavior had not gone unnoticed. Documentation was being compiled. When the time was right, consequences would follow. Their conversation ended when other candidates began stirring. Vance rejoined the other colonels without further acknowledgement. But Kira carried his revelation like a flame rekindled from dying embers. From across the staging area, Lundgren watched. He had not heard the words exchanged, but he recognized the shift in Kira's posture. Something had changed. Some piece of information had transferred that altered the balance of power in ways he could not see. His paranoia, always present, began to spike. The colonels were not just observers. They were participants in something larger. And somehow, the woman he had been trying to destroy was at the center of it. Night fell over the assessment bivouac. Candidates pitched shelters and collapsed into exhausted sleep. The colonels positioned themselves at observation points around the perimeter, maintaining watch and shifts. Lundgren volunteered for first watch. Specifically, watch over the sector where Kira had established her position. Kira did not sleep. She lay in her shelter with eyes open, listening to the sounds of the wilderness. Footsteps approached sometime after midnight. Careful footsteps designed to avoid detection. She recognized Lundgren's silhouette in the darkness. He was not carrying a weapon, but his hands were empty and ready. He had abandoned all pretense of professionalism. What remained was something primal and dangerous. He knelt beside her shelter. His hand reached toward her throat. Around the perimeter, four colonels reached for their radios simultaneously. Lundgren's hand closed around her throat before she could draw breath to scream. His weight pinned her to the ground as he leaned close, his whisper carrying venom refined over years of hatred. He told her this would be a training accident, another unfortunate casualty of a program that pushed candidates beyond their limits. No one would question it. No one would investigate. She would simply become another cautionary statistic, another reason why women did not belong in special operations. His fingers tightened. Stars exploded across Kira's vision as her airway collapsed. Reyes spoke in her mind. His voice was calm despite the chaos, just as it had been in the moments before his death. Do not think. Just act. Her body moved without conscious direction. Years of training compressed into 4 seconds of explosive violence. Her right hand drove upward, fingers extended, striking Lundgren's throat with precision that turned his growl into a strangled gasp. Her left hand followed, thumb finding his eye socket with enough pressure to send him reeling backward. Her knee came up as he doubled over, connecting with his groin and dropping him to the dirt. Lundgren collapsed. His hands clutched his damaged throat while animal sounds escaped his lips. He tried to rise and failed. Tried again and managed only to roll onto his side, curling into a fetal position. Kira stood over him. Her chest heaved with adrenaline and oxygen deprivation, but her voice emerged steady and cold. "I could kill you. I'm choosing not to. Remember that." Flashlight beams converged on their position from 4 directions. The colonels emerged from the darkness like judgment made manifest. Colonel Volkov already had his radio pressed to his ear, calling for military police with clipped urgency. Colonel Blackwood held her service weapon in a 2-handed grip, muzzle trained on Lundgren's writhing form. Colonel Vance reached Kira first. He asked if she was injured. She touched her throat and felt the bruises already forming, but shook her head. "No sin permanent." Nothing that would not heal. Captain Sue approached Lundgren. The SEAL commander stood over the fallen instructor with an expression that combined contempt and satisfaction in equal measure. "Chief Petty Officer Lundgren," he said, "you just assaulted a decorated combat veteran with 14 confirmed enemy neutralizations in front of 406 officers. Your career ended 30 seconds ago." Lundgren tried to speak, but only managed a wet cough. Whatever response he had prepared died in his damaged throat. Colonel Blackwood holstered her weapon as the sound of approaching vehicles cut through the night. Military police, medical personnel, the machinery of accountability finally grinding into motion. She addressed Lundgren with the measured tone of someone delivering a verdict. "3 of us have stars in our future. 1 of us is a Medal of Honor nominee." She gestured toward Kira. "And you thought she was just a recruit." The MPs arrived and took control of the scene. They secured Lundgren with professional efficiency, ignoring his attempts to claim authority he no longer possessed. Medical personnel checked Kira's injuries and pronounced her fit to continue despite the vivid marks circling her neck. The other candidates had gathered at the edge of the light, awakened by the commotion. Jerome stood at the front of the group, his face pale with shock, but his eyes fixed on Kira with something approaching awe. Declan leaned on a makeshift crutch beside him, his expression mirroring the same stunned recognition. They had all heard stories about women in combat. They had all held opinions shaped by speculation and prejudice and second-hand accounts. Now, they had witnessed the reality. A woman half Lundgren's size had put him on the ground in 4 seconds using nothing but training and will. Kira's hands began to tremble as the adrenaline faded. Not from fear, but from the weight of what had almost happened. What she had almost been forced to do. She had trained for years to defend herself, but training and reality occupied different territories. The line between necessary force and lethal force was thinner than anyone who had not crossed it could understand. Colonel Vance appeared at her side. He did not touch her, but his presence offered something solid to anchor against. He told her that she had performed exactly as they hoped. She had defended herself without unnecessary escalation. She had demonstrated the judgment that separated true leaders from mere operators. He told her that what happened tonight would become part of her record, not as a stain, but as a testament to her character under impossible circumstances. Kira looked at the vehicle carrying Lundgren away. Red and blue lights painted the desert in alternating colors. A man who had tormented her for days was now facing consequences he never believed would find him. It did not feel like victory. It felt like exhaustion and relief and the hollow knowledge that some battles left no winners. The assessment was not over. Colonel Vance reminded her of that as the chaos subsided. 24 hours remained. The candidates needed leadership to complete what they had started. He asked if she was prepared to provide it. Kira straightened her spine despite the pain radiating from her throat. She had not come this far to stop now. She had not survived Lundgren's final assault only to let his shadow determine the outcome. She told Vance that she was ready. He nodded with something that might have been pride. Then he announced to the assembled candidates that due to instructor unavailability, the assessment would continue under the observation of all four colonels. Petty Officer Second Class Odia would serve as de facto squad leader for the remaining duration. The candidates exchanged uncertain glances. Jerome stepped forward first, offering Kira a salute that regulations did not require. Declan followed. One by one, the others joined until the entire group stood at attention before the woman who had just demonstrated exactly why she deserved to lead them. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the assessment area, Lundgren's allies were already receiving word of his arrest. The network that had protected him for years would not simply accept his removal. Retaliation would come in forms both obvious and subtle. But that was a problem for tomorrow. Tonight, Kira had 24 hours to prove that everything the colonels believed about her was true. She gathered her squad and began issuing orders. There was still a mission to complete. Dawn broke over the assessment area with colors that seemed too beautiful for what had transpired in the darkness. The candidates gathered in formation, but the energy had shifted. They looked at Kira differently now. Some with respect earned through witnessed action. Others with the uncomfortable recognition that their assumptions had been shattered. Whispers moved through the group like wind through tall grass. Stories of what happened were already evolving into legend. The woman who put Lundgren down in 4 seconds. The woman 4 colonels had been watching all along. The woman who might be something far more than anyone had suspected. Colonel Vance addressed the formation with the morning sun at his back. He announced that due to instructor unavailability, the final 24 hours of the assessment would proceed under direct observation of Joint Command representatives. Petty Officer Second Class Kira Odia would serve as squad leader for all remaining candidates. No objections emerged. No questions arose. The candidates had seen enough to understand that this was not a suggestion. Kira stepped into her new role without hesitation. Her first orders focused on welfare. Hydration check, injury assessment, equipment inspection. She moved through the squad with efficiency, ensuring that every candidate was prepared for what lay ahead before considering the mission itself. Jerome reported minor blisters, but nothing debilitating. Declan's knee had improved overnight thanks to the medic's treatment. The others showed the accumulated wear of days under pressure, but nothing that would prevent completion. Satisfied, Kira gathered the squad around her map and began outlining the day's objectives. The route would take them through simulated hostile territory, requiring tactical movement and coordinated action. She assigned positions based on individual strengths she had observed throughout the assessment. She asked for input and incorporated suggestions that improved upon her initial plan. The colonels watched without interference. This was what they had come to see. 40 miles away at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, Lieutenant Commander Adrian Chase received news that turned his blood to ice water. Lundgren had been arrested. Not just detained or questioned, but actually arrested by military police on charges that included assault and conduct unbecoming. The man Chase had protected for years was now in custody, and custody meant interrogation, and interrogation meant exposure. Chase's hands trembled as he reached for his phone. He had contacts. Favor Zode, a master chief in personnel who could lose paperwork, an administrator who could delay processes. If he moved quickly enough, he might be able to muddy the waters before the investigation gained momentum. He made the call. The master chief answered. Chase explained the situation in terms carefully chosen to avoid explicit incrimination. Just administrative assistance. Just professional courtesy between men who understood how things really worked. The Master Chief agreed to help. Neither of them noticed the click on the line that indicated monitoring. Colonel Volkov received the intercept report within the hour. He read the transcript with expression carved from stone, then placed a call of his own. Naval Criminal Investigative Service. The conversation was brief and resulted in immediate action. What had begun as an assault charge was now expanding into a criminal investigation with tentacles reaching far beyond a single instructor's misconduct. Chase's interference had transformed a contained incident into something that would require excavation of every buried complaint and erased file in Lundgren's history. The assessment route took Kira's squad through terrain designed to simulate hostile operational environments. Urban structures built for training exercises. Wooded areas with hidden observation posts. Open ground that required careful tactical crossing. Kira led from the front when terrain demanded it, and from the center when coordination mattered more. Her decisions came quickly but not recklessly. She processed information from her squad members and adjusted plans in real time. When a candidate suggested an alternate approach to a particularly exposed crossing, she evaluated the proposal on its merits and adopted it without ego. The colonels made notes. This was the quality they sought. Not rigid adherence to personal plans, but adaptive leadership that elevated the entire unit. By late afternoon, Jerome approached Kira during a rest break. His expression carried weight beyond simple exhaustion. He told her that he would testify. Whatever investigation followed, whatever consequences emerged, he would tell the truth about everything he had witnessed. Lundgren's targeting, the sabotaged equipment, the systematic harassment that would have broken anyone without Kira's resilience. Declan appeared beside him and offered the same commitment. Two witnesses willing to stand against a system that had protected predators for years. Kira thanked them. She understood what their courage would cost. Testifying against powerful interests within the military was not a career-enhancing decision. These men were risking their futures to ensure that what happened to her would not happen to others. Elsewhere, NCIS agents were already executing search warrants. Cortez's hidden files had been recovered through channels that bypassed the administrators who had originally buried them. 6 women, 8 years of abuse. A pattern so clear that denial would require willful blindness. The evidence was assembling itself into an indictment that would reach far beyond Lundgren. Night fell as the squad approached the final navigation segment. Kira checked coordinates and verified bearing. The extraction point lay 8 kilometers northeast through terrain that would test everything they had left. She signaled the squad to move out. They traveled in tactical formation, maintaining noise discipline despite exhaustion that made every step a conscious decision. The colonels followed at observation distance, shadows among shadows. 2 kilometers from the extraction point, Kira raised a fist. The squad froze. Something was wrong. Lights flickered in the tree line ahead. Not the controlled illumination of assessment markers, but the irregular movement of handheld sources. Vehicle engines rumbled somewhere beyond visual range. Voices carried on the night air, too distant to understand but too close to ignore. This was not part of the assessment. The scenario briefing had included no elements in this sector. No other training exercises were scheduled in this area. Kira signaled the squad into concealment and moved forward to observe. What she saw made her breath catch. 3 vehicles. Civilian trucks without military markings. Men unloading crates with the urgent efficiency of people conducting business they did not want witnessed. The operation had the unmistakable signature of smuggling. They had walked into something real, something dangerous, something that had nothing to do with their assessment and everything to do with survival. Colonel Vance appeared at her shoulder. His whisper confirmed what she already knew. This was not planned. These people were not supposed to be here. And now, 12 exhausted candidates and 4 observing colonels had stumbled into the middle of a criminal operation with no weapons and no backup. Kira assessed the situation with the same calm she had maintained throughout every crisis. Options formed and dissolved in her mind. Running was possible, but would leave the smugglers free to continue. Engaging was impossible without weapons. Observing and reporting was the only viable choice. She began issuing orders. Memorize faces. Record vehicle details. Document everything possible while maintaining concealment. Then one of the smugglers turned directly toward their position and shouted an alarm. The shout echoed across the clearing and froze time into crystalline fragments. Kira processed the situation in the space between heartbeats. 12 exhausted candidates. For unarmed colonels. An unknown number of smugglers who had just discovered their presence. She gave the signal for total concealment. The squad melted into the terrain with discipline that exceeded anything the assessment had demanded. Months of training compressed into instinctive action as bodies pressed against earth, and breathing slowed to imperceptible rhythm. Colonel Vance had his radio out, whispering coordinates and situation reports to base security. His expression told Kira everything she needed to know. Help was coming. Help was 40 minutes away, an eternity when measured against the immediate threat. The smugglers fanned out from their vehicles. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness, searching the tree line where the alarm had originated. Voices called to each other in tones that mixed urgency with anger. Their operation had been compromised, and they knew it. A gunshot cracked the night, then another. Warning shots fired into the canopy above the squad's position. Leaves rained down like confetti at a celebration no one had requested. Kira assessed her options with brutal clarity. Engagement was impossible without weapons. Retreat would allow the smugglers to escape and potentially harm anyone who stumbled upon them later. The only viable path forward was intelligence gathering combined with survival. She issued orders through hand signals refined by years of operational experience. Memorize faces. Count personnel. Note vehicle makes and models. Record license plate numbers, if visible. Document everything possible while maintaining concealment. The squad responded with precision that would have impressed their instructors under normal circumstances. Each candidate became a sensor node, collecting information that would prove valuable once this encounter ended. One smuggler broke from the search pattern and moved directly toward Jerome's position. Whether by chance or instinct, the man had chosen a vector that would expose the young sailor within seconds. Kira did not think. She acted. She covered the distance in a dead sprint that made no sound against the forest floor. The smuggler heard nothing until her hand closed over his mouth from behind. Her other arm wrapped around his throat in a choke that cut blood flow to his brain. He struggled, through elbows, tried to bite. None of it mattered. 12 seconds. That was all it took. The smuggler went limp in her arms, unconscious but breathing. She lowered him to the ground and secured his hands with his own belt before he could recover. The other smugglers had seen their companion disappear. Panic replaced bravado. They abandoned their cargo and sprinted for their vehicles. Engines roared to life. Tires threw dirt as trucks accelerated away from the scene. Sirens wailed in the distance. Base security, arriving faster than the 40-minute estimate. The smugglers heard the sound and pushed their vehicles harder, disappearing into the night through routes they had clearly used before. Kira gathered her squad as the security vehicles arrived. 12 candidates emerged from concealment with information that would prove invaluable. 3 vehicle descriptions, 2 partial license plates, 5 distinct facial features. The captured smuggler, still unconscious but beginning to stir. Colonel Vance coordinated with the security team, while Kira ensured her people were accounted for and unharmed. The adrenaline was fading now, replaced by the hollow exhaustion that followed every crisis. Jerome appeared at her side. His hands were shaking, but his voice was steady when he told her that she had saved his life. Another few seconds, and that smuggler would have found him. Kira told him that protecting her people was exactly what leaders did. Nothing more complicated than that. The security team took custody of the captured smuggler and began processing the scene. Evidence technicians documented the abandoned cargo, while investigators interviewed the candidates about what they had witnessed. Captain Sue approached Kira as the chaos organized itself into procedure. The SEAL commander who had watched her with skepticism since the first day now looked at her with something entirely different. He told her that he had doubts about this program, about whether anyone could handle the kind of leadership they were trying to develop, about whether the qualities they sought actually existed in any single operator. He told her that he did not doubt anymore. His hand extended. Kira took it. The handshake carried weight beyond simple professional courtesy. He informed her that he would be formally recommending her for the joint initiative, not as a candidate to be evaluated, but as a leader to be developed. Whatever happened next in her career would happen with his full endorsement. Kira thanked him. The words felt inadequate for what the moment represented, but they were all she had. The captured smuggler regained consciousness as security prepared to transport him. He looked around at the military personnel surrounding him and made a calculation that prioritized self-preservation above loyalty. He wanted to talk. He wanted to make a deal. He had information that would interest them far more than whatever charges he faced for tonight's activities. The investigator asked what kind of information. The smuggler mentioned a name. Lieutenant Commander Adrian Chase. He explained that their operation had been using training schedules provided by Chase for months. They knew exactly when assessment groups would be in which areas. They knew which sectors would be empty and when. The investigator asked how Chase had provided this information. Through an instructor, the smuggler replied. A chief petty officer named Lundgren. He was paid to look the other way and to ensure that anyone too observant or too competent was removed from programs before they could notice anything suspicious. Silence followed the revelation. The colonels exchanged glances that communicated volumes without words. Kira understood now. She had not been targeted simply because she was a woman. She had been targeted because Lundgren recognized her as a threat to something far larger than his prejudice. Her competence, her observation skills, her refusal to quit despite everything thrown at her. She was exactly the kind of person who might notice an operation hiding in plain sight. The smuggler kept talking, desperate to trade information for leniency. Each word painted a picture of corruption that extended further than anyone had imagined. Kira looked at the stars emerging above the tree line and felt something shift inside her chest. What had begun as an assessment had become something else entirely. A reckoning that would reshape careers and institutions and lives. And she was standing at the center of it all. The extraction point materialized through the pre-dawn haze like a promise finally kept. Military vehicles waited in formation, their headlights cutting through the darkness that had witnessed so much over the past 48 hours. Kira led her squad across the final checkpoint and felt the weight of the assessment lift from her shoulders. 12 candidates had started the final phase. 8 remained. Every one of them had performed beyond expectations when circumstances demanded more than any training scenario could simulate. Base security personnel swarmed the surrounding area, following up on the intelligence gathered during the smuggling encounter. Helicopters swept overhead with searchlights probing the terrain. What had begun as a candidate assessment had triggered an operation that would take weeks to fully resolve. The transport back to Coronado passed in exhausted silence. Candidates slept against each other's shoulders. Their competition transformed into camaraderie through shared crisis. Kira stayed awake, watching the California landscape scroll past the window and processing everything that had happened. Coronado greeted them with controlled chaos. The investigation had exploded beyond anyone's expectations. NCIS agents moved through buildings with the focused energy of people following threads that led somewhere important. Administrative personnel whispered in clusters, their faces carrying the stunned recognition that their institution had harbored something rotten. Lieutenant Commander Adrian Chase was arrested at 0847. The charges read like a catalog of betrayal. Conspiracy, obstruction of justice, accessory to smuggling, conduct unbecoming an officer. His decades of service meant nothing against the evidence recovered from Cortez's files and the smuggler's testimony. Lundgren's charges expanded accordingly. What had started as assault now included conspiracy, accepting bribes, and multiple counts of abuse of authority spanning years. The man who had believed himself untouchable was learning that immunity had limits. The scope of the corruption emerged through interviews and document recovery. 8 years of systematic targeting. 6 women whose careers had been destroyed through manufactured failures and buried complaints. A network of protection that extended through multiple commands, all of it designed to maintain the fiction that certain spaces belonged only to certain people. Senior Chief Cortez found Kira outside the medical building where she had just completed her post-assessment examination. The older woman's eyes glistened with tears she made no effort to hide. She told Kira about 3 specific women she had trained over the years. Exceptional operators who had shown every sign of becoming leaders. All 3 had been assigned to programs where Lundgren held influence. All 3 had been destroyed before they could fulfill their potential. Cortez had watched it happen and been powerless to stop it. Her complaints disappeared. Her concerns were dismissed. The system had protected its own at the expense of those it should have served. Now, finally, someone had survived long enough to matter. Someone had exposed what years of silence had concealed. She thanked Kira. The words came out broken by emotion, but their meaning was clear. This moment was not just about one woman's success. It was about justice delayed, finally arriving for those who had been denied it. Colonel Vance requested Kira's presence in his temporary office that afternoon. She arrived expecting a debriefing. What she received was something else entirely. He showed her a file, but annotated with his handwritten notes dating back 18 months. He had found a record after a 3rd deployment, drawn by something in the official account of the mission where Reyes died. The report described tactical success. Vance had read between the lines and seen something more. A woman who faced an impossible choice and found a way through. A woman who carried guilt but transformed it into purpose rather than paralysis. A woman whose potential exceeded anything her current position could develop. He had built this entire assessment around proving his instinct correct. The joint initiative needed leaders who could operate in environments where traditional command structures failed. Leaders who could make decisions under pressure that would break ordinary officers. Leaders who could inspire loyalty through competence and character rather than rank alone. Kira had proven herself to be exactly that kind of leader, not despite the obstacles placed in her path, but because of how she had overcome them. The 4 colonels convened formally that evening. Their evaluations were unanimous. Petty Officer 2nd Class Kira Odia would be recommended for the Joint Special Operations Initiative with the strongest possible endorsement. Her performance had exceeded every metric they had established. More importantly, she had demonstrated something that could not be measured. The quality that separated good operators from great leaders. The ability to maintain humanity under inhuman pressure. Kira found privacy in her quarters as the sun set over Coronado. She dialed her father's number with hands that trembled slightly despite her best efforts at control. He answered immediately, as if he had been waiting by the phone. She told him that she had made it. The words came out simple and direct, because anything more elaborate would have broken her composure entirely. Her father was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the same steady warmth she had known her entire life. "Odias do not break," he said. "I never doubted you for a single moment." The tears came then, not from sadness or fear, but from the release of pressure she had carried since the moment she stepped off the transport at Coronado. She cried for Reyes, whose death had shaped her into the leader she had become. She cried for the women who came before her, whose sacrifices had remained invisible until now. She cried for herself, for the girl who had trained in her father's backyard and become something she never imagined possible. Her father listened without interruption. Some moments required no words. A message arrived on her phone as the tears subsided. A formal summons bearing the signatures of all 4 colonels. She was requested to attend a ceremony at Coronado in 1 week. The message explained that the ceremony was not just for her. Invitations had been extended to every woman whose career had been damaged by Lundgren's abuse. Their records were being formally reviewed for reinstatement consideration. Their stories were finally being heard. Justice, Kira understood, was not only about punishment. It was about restoration, about acknowledging that wrongs had been committed and taking action to repair what could still be repaired. She would stand among those women next week, not as their savior, but as the latest in a line of warriors who had refused to be broken. The fight was not over, but for the first time since she arrived at Coronado, Kira allowed herself to believe that victory was possible. 1 week later, Coronado witnessed something that existed in no official protocol. A ceremony created by 4 colonels who understood that some moments required acknowledgement beyond standard military procedure. The courtyard outside Building 618 had been transformed. Chairs arranged in precise rows. A podium bearing the insignia of Joint Command. Flags representing every branch of service standing sentinel against the California breeze. 6 women stood in formation at the front. Their uniforms varied, reflecting the different branches from which they had been expelled. Their faces carried the weight of years spent wondering if anyone would ever believe what had happened to them. Their presence here was both vindication and resurrection. Kira recognized none of them personally, but she knew their stories now. The files Cortez had preserved contained more than evidence. They contained lives interrupted, careers destroyed, potential extinguished by systematic cruelty. These women had been exceptional operators targeted precisely because their excellence threatened men who could not compete fairly. The ceremony began with Colonel Vance addressing the assembled personnel. He spoke about institutional failure and personal courage. He spoke about the cost of silence and the value of persistence. He spoke about the women standing before them. Each one owed an apology that words alone could never fully provide. When he finished, he invited Kira to the podium. She had prepared remarks, but abandoned them as she looked out at the faces watching her. The 6 women in front. The colonels seated to the side. Jerome Talley in the second row, his graduation insignia gleaming on his collar. Cortez standing at attention near the back, tears already forming in her eyes. Kira spoke from the heart instead. She told them that she was not here as a hero. She was here as someone who almost became the 7th woman in that formation. She acknowledged that survival was not always merit. Luck had played a role. Timing had played a role. The presence of 4 colonels who happened to witness the right moment had played a role. She told them that the system had failed everyone who came before her, that her success did not erase their suffering or undo the years they had lost, that standing here accepting recognition while they stood there seeking reinstatement felt profoundly unfair. But she also told them that their courage had made this moment possible. The complaints they filed even when ignored. The truth they told even when dismissed. The refusal to pretend that what happened was acceptable. Every act of resistance had been a brick in the foundation that finally supported accountability. She finished by promising that she would spend her career ensuring no one else faced what they had faced, that their stories would inform her leadership, that their sacrifice would have meaning beyond this ceremony. The applause that followed was not the polite acknowledgement of military protocol. It was something deeper, something earned through honesty rather than performance. Jerome found her after the formal proceedings concluded. His graduation from basic underwater demolition training had occurred 3 days earlier. He was now officially on the path toward becoming a SEAL, following a dream that had nearly died during those brutal assessment days. He told her that she had changed his understanding of strength, that watching her endure had given him permission to struggle without shame, that her words about breaking and choosing to continue anyway had carried him through moments when quitting seemed like the only option. He saluted her. The gesture was not required given their relative ranks. It was offered as something more personal than protocol demanded. Kira returned the salute and told him that she expected to see great things from him. The Navy needed operators who understood that loyalty and integrity mattered more than advancement. News arrived during the reception that followed. Lundgren's court-martial had been scheduled for the following month. The charges now numbered in the dozens, spanning years of misconduct that investigation had unearthed. His conviction was all but certain. Chase had turned state's evidence in exchange for reduced charges. His testimony was filling gaps that documentation alone could not address. The smuggling operation had been dismantled. The network of protection that had shielded abusers was being systematically exposed and eliminated. The Navy had announced a comprehensive review of training commands across all installations. Policies were being rewritten. Reporting procedures were being strengthened. The institutional change that had seemed impossible was becoming reality. Senior Chief Cortez appeared at Kira's elbow with news of her own. A promotion had been approved. Her years of ignored warnings had finally been recognized as the courageous persistence they represented. She would be taking a position at Naval Personnel Command, specifically tasked with ensuring that complaints received proper attention. The two women stood together for a moment, connected by experiences that words could not fully capture. Cortez had fought this battle for years without victory. Kira had won in weeks because the right people happened to be watching. They both understood that justice was not about individual triumph. It was about changing systems so that future women would not need to be exceptional just to survive. Colonel Blackwood approached as Cortez departed. The Army officer had been watching Kira throughout the ceremony with an expression that suggested evaluation rather than celebration. She offered something unexpected, a position as her aide during the months before the joint initiative formally launched, an opportunity to see how commands were built from the inside. Mentorship from someone who had walked this path decades earlier, when the obstacles were even higher and the support even scarcer. Kira accepted without hesitation. Learning from those who had blazed trails was how progress continued across generations. The cemetery lay 40 minutes from Coronado. Kira made the drive alone as the sun began its descent toward the Pacific horizon. Diego Reyes rested in a section reserved for fallen special operations personnel. His headstone was simple, bearing only name, rank, and dates. It said nothing about the man he had been or the sacrifice that ended his life. Kira knelt beside the grave and spoke to him as if he could hear. She told him about the assessment, about Lundgren and the attack and the 4 colonels who witnessed everything. She told him about the smuggling operation and the investigation and the ceremony that honored women he had never met. She told him that she finally understood what he meant in those last moments. Do not think, just act. It was not about shooting without consideration. It was about trusting herself to make the right choice when the moment demanded decision. It was about believing in the training and instincts she had developed rather than freezing in doubt. She did not hesitate anymore. She acted with conviction because she had learned to trust the person she had become. She placed his challenge coin on the headstone, a small brass disc worn smooth by years of handling. He had given it to her after their first deployment together, telling her that she had earned his respect. She told him that she hoped she had made him proud. Then she stood, wiped her eyes, and walked toward her future. 6 months later, Kira stood in a facility that did not officially exist. The building bore no markings, appeared on no maps, and housed a program that would reshape special operations for generations to come. 12 operators assembled before her in the training bay. Army Rangers, Navy SEALs, Marine Raiders, Air Force Combat Contrôlé, the finest warriors from every branch, selected through a process even more rigorous than the one Kira had survived at Coronado. She was their commander now. The rank on her collar had changed, reflecting promotions accelerated by circumstances and performance. But the title mattered less than the responsibility it represented. These 12 men and women would become the template for a new kind of leadership, and everything she did would shape who they became. Her eyes moved across the formation and stopped on a young woman standing in the back row. Petty Officer 3rd Class Amara Okonkwo, 5'2", 115 pounds, a reconnaissance specialist with skills that exceeded her physical stature in every measurable way. The larger candidates had already begun dismissing her. Kira recognized the dynamic because she had lived it. The assumptions, the underestimation, the certainty that someone so small could not possibly belong among operators built like professional athletes. She announced the first training evolution. Hand-to-hand assessment in the combat pit. Random pairings. The assignments she read were not random at all. Okonkwo would face Sergeant 1st Class Derek Hamlin, 6'4", 230 pounds, the largest candidate in the program. Okonkwo's expression flickered with uncertainty before hardening into determination. Hamlin smirked with the confidence of someone who believes size determined outcome. Kira caught Okonkwo's eye and spoke directly to her. Prove them wrong. That is what we do here. The observation deck above the training bay held 4 figures who had become familiar over the preceding months. Colonel Vance, Colonel Blackwood, Captain Sue, Colonel Volkov. They served as the program's oversight board now, ensuring that the initiative they had championed received the resources and protection it needed to succeed. Vance caught Kira's eye through the reinforced glass. He nodded once, a small gesture that carried the weight of everything they had built together. She returned the nod and turned her attention back to her candidates. There was work to do. News had arrived the previous week about the final resolution of cases that had begun at Coronado. Brock Lundgren had received 12 years at the United States Disciplinary Barracks in Fort Leavenworth. His crimes had been laid bare during a court-martial that lasted 3 weeks and produced testimony from over 20 witnesses. He would spend more than a decade surrounded by the consequences of his choices. Adrian Chase had received 8 years after his cooperation with investigators. His testimony had exposed additional misconduct beyond the smuggling operation, implicating officers at 3 other installations. The network of protection he had helped maintain was being systematically dismantled. The smuggling ring itself had been destroyed. 14 arrests, millions of dollars in contraband seized. Routes that had operated for years finally closed. The women Lundgren had victimized received formal apologies from the Secretary of the Navy. Their records had been corrected, annotations removed, reinstatement offered to all who wanted it. 3 had returned to civilian life, their trust in the institution permanently broken. 2 had accepted positions in training commands, determined to protect others from what they had experienced. 1 had returned to operational training. Kira had watched her complete the assessment that Lundgren had denied her years earlier. She was thriving now, on track to become exactly the leader she had always been capable of becoming. A letter waited on Kira's desk when she returned to her office that evening. The handwriting on the envelope was familiar enough to make her breath catch. Her father had written to announce his retirement. 32 years of service ending with a ceremony she would attend next month. He wrote about his career, about the challenges he had faced and the victories he had achieved. He wrote about the Navy he had joined as a young man and the Navy he was leaving as an old one. But mostly he wrote about her. He told her that his greatest pride was not his own accomplishments, but watching her exceed everything he had dreamed for her. He told her that every sacrifice he had made felt worthwhile when he saw what she had become. He told her that the legacy he cared about was not his name on any plaque, but her presence in positions of influence where she could shape the future. He signed a letter the way he always had, with love and absolute confidence. Master Chief Samuel Odia, United States Navy, retired. Kira read the letter twice before setting it beside the photograph that had occupied her desk for 6 months. Night fell over the facility. The candidates had retired to their quarters, exhausted from a day designed to push them beyond comfortable limits. The colonels had departed for their own responsibilities. Kira alone remained in the administrative building, reviewing files by lamplight. Each folder represented a potential leader, strengths to develop, weaknesses to address, potential to unlock through the right combination of challenge and support. She annotated each file with observations from the day's training, building profiles that would guide development over the coming months. This was the work now, not individual heroism, but institutional change. Not surviving a corrupt system, but building a better one. Not proving that women belonged, but creating environments where belonging was assumed rather than earned through exceptional suffering. She was building something that would outlast her. A culture where excellence was recognized regardless of package. Where abuse was exposed rather than protected. Where the right people rose because the wrong ones were no longer permitted to block their path. The photograph on her desk showed her original unit before everything changed. Diego Reyes stood beside her, both of them young and unaware of what awaited them. His smile was the same one she remembered from 1,000 small moments. His presence was the absence she still felt every day. But she did not feel guilt anymore when she looked at his face. She felt purpose. His death had taught her not to hesitate. Her survival had taught her to create change. Both lessons lived in everything she did now. She placed the photograph back on her desk and returned to her files. Tomorrow, another candidate would walk through the gates wondering if she belonged here. Another woman would face assumptions about her capabilities based on her appearance. Another operator would need someone to see her potential rather than her limitations. Kira would make sure she knew the answer was yes. If this story moved you, drop a comment about what resonated most with you, or share if you have ever seen someone prove their doubters wrong in a way that changed everything.